Hey everybody, St. Paul here. Welcome to episode 50 of Music on the Run. Yeah, we're closing the pool down. It's a beautiful fall day here. Wait until you hear this new episode. Music on the Run is next. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 50 of Music on the Run. It's hard to believe that we are already at episode 50. 2 years, man, flies by. Anyways, thanks for joining us. My name is St. Paul Peterson. And before we get into this interview with a couple of old buddies of mine, let's get into the gratitude segment. I want to highlight a couple of our Music on the Run patrons. Now, if you're wondering what a patron is, they've got a little skin in the game. They're helping us produce this financially. Just go to patreon.com/Music on the Run podcast, and you can help us out anywhere between $2 and $10 a month. And right now, I want to say a big thank you to our $5 a month patrons, my running brother, Steve Schmidt, and Priscilla Hupsel. Thanks, you guys, so much for helping us put on this broadcast. We're having so much fun with it, and we couldn't do it without you. All right, well, let's move in to this interview. These two guys individually have incredible careers, but together they've been in some pretty cool bands, and I actually got to tour with them as well. Right now, they're both with an American Idol and Grammy winner. They're with Carrie Underwood. I couldn't even spit it out because, you know how I feel about Carrie. Please welcome Chad Jefferson, Scott Sheriff. Fellas!
Hey.
Hello!
How you guys
Thanks
doing?
for having us, Paul.
Man, I'm so glad to have you both. Thanks for joining me and taking time out of your schedule. I know you guys are getting ready to go to rehearsal pretty quickly here, right?
Yeah, tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Now, you're rehearsing with Carrie. You have a big show coming up, a residency. Is that correct, in Vegas?
Yeah, so we started residency in December, and it's going to be 2 weeks. And then right now we're going to go back, I think it's in March, where we do another residency, another 2 weeks there. So we're excited. This is my first time, I don't know about you, Scott, but this is my first time doing a residency in Vegas. And I've had a lot of musician friends that have done it, and they're like, it's the most incredible thing because literally you hit a button on the elevator to go to sound check, and then you go back to the room and, you just hang out the whole time. So I'm excited to do that.
Scott, have you ever done a residency in Vegas before?
I have not. The only residency I've ever done has been in Niagara Falls, Canada. I did several residencies at Fallsview Casino there, just on the Canada side of the falls.
Right.
And they've always been these pretty cool house shows, one called Cruisin' Classics, and another one called Rave On, which was the story of Buddy Holly and Big Bopper and Richie Valens. And I did another one called the Rock and Soul, where we did tunes from Memphis and Chicago and just kind of did a bunch of rhythm and Philly soul. So it was pretty cool stuff. It was always a lot of fun, and it's really gorgeous up there. But that's the only place. I've never been to Vegas for a residency.
Tell me where Carrie's residency is so we can tell my fans, and they'll come see you.
It's at the World Resort, and it's a brand new place, World Resort. And from what I understand, it's basically, it's going to be rotating between Carrie being there, Luke Bryan, Katy Perry, and Celine Dion. So a couple of people you might have heard of. So it's going to be kind of cool. But we're not there at the same time. We're just rotating.
Right.
From what I'm told, it's kind of closer to the Stratosphere end of the Strip.
Okay.
On the side of the Bellagio. I think Resorts World it's by Hilton. So it's brand new.
What a riot. So you guys just get to hang out. Scott, you're not bringing your clubs, are you?
Absolutely bringing my clubs.
For those of you
I've already got
Yeah, go ahead.
I already got some high school friends who are planning a golf trip around the Vegas show, so I'm excited for those opportunities.
I may have to do the same thing.
I got to
Yeah.
say that Scott, like when we're on the road, if you can't find Scott, just look for the nearest golf course. He's always golfing, which I think is great because you've got to have something on the road to not, drive you insane.
Well, Scott and I, when we were working together, all three of us. Now, because my fans may not know this, but the three of us traveled together in Kenny Loggins' band.
That's right.
That's how we know each other, and we kept our friendship together, and that was, is that over 10 years ago?
15?
2008.
2008, yeah.
How is that even possible? That's right. Wow, man, did we have fun or what on that tour? So we'd be on the tour.
Great.
We'd be on tour, and Scott and I would, he'd teach me all these little golf games, and we'd be playing for, did we ever play for any money? You always seem to skew the game in your favor, Scott, and I don't know. I've never figured those games.
I'm not very good at. I get pretty rattled if I play for high stakes, so I think we pretty much play for $1.
I think that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it might have been 2007 actually. I think my first Kenny Loggins tour was that 2007, and I first subbed in 2006, and that's when I got the gig the next year. I think that's right.
Right. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the Kenny connection in a little bit later on. I do want to know a little bit about the beginnings now. Scott, you grew up in Bethlehem, or right outside of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Eastern Pennsylvania, Bethlehem. It's Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton. It's kind of a Tri-Cities area, and it's kind of right in between New York and Philadelphia. And so, we were always just a couple hour and a half drive to see, a sports game or a concert in either of those towns. So it was kind of a nice central location, but we lived out in the country, so it was not. It was a pretty humble upbringing, and I played brass instruments at school and picked up keyboard just kind of when I figured out that I could learn to play by ear. I got that from my dad. And
really,
so
was he musical as well? Your father?
Yeah, he played stand-up bass. His father had an orchestra in Bethlehem, and my dad apparently, before I was born, he was always gone New Year's Eve. That was a big money maker for the guys who doing gigs around Bethlehem, and so he played stand-up bass, and that's when he brought home a little extra cash, and so they could have a nice New Year's Eve, and so I got that from him. And my mom was also a music teacher and a music educator, and she plays the church organ and the piano, and so she's more legit, can sight read music really well, and so I have some of those sensibilities too from her. But when I figured out you could still be cool and play piano in the advent of MTV, I was like, maybe I ought to get a synthesizer and join a band. And so that's how kind of everything started for me.
You did now. You also you didn't originally go to college for music. Is that right?
Yeah, I had the conservative parents who were like, oh well, maybe you should just keep have a plan A and a plan B, and so I went to Penn State with a business major in mind and was going to minor in music. And then just all my teachers were just saying, "Really, you're not a music major?" I guess because I was excelling or whatever. But so then I had a choir director kind of steer me towards Berkeley at that point. He said, you're not going to get what you're looking for here at Penn State. We're more of a music ed type place, band directors and choir directors, that kind of thing. There's really no professional music training there. But so he steered me to a couple different places, one of them which was Berkeley. And my parents just kind of relented and let me chase my dream up there for the second or the next 3 years until I graduated from there.
You had already been playing in clubs and all throughout Allentown in Bethlehem. Is that right?
Well, we had a little garage band. We played in some under 21 clubs, but I wasn't old enough to really play the big bar scene. I could go out with a parent and maybe go watch I had a choir director in high school, also played in a in a top 40 band, so it was fun to go out and watch him do his thing on the side on the weekends. But I couldn't really take part in that, so we would play at fairs and outdoor gigs and high school dances, junior high dances, wherever we could play for folks our own age. But there really wasn't too much of an underage club scene, and there were a couple clubs, but didn't really get in. I never really have a whole lot of bar scene experience until I was older. I went all through Berkeley and never played any clubs in Boston. I just did shows within the school walls, and I did hook up with a top 40 band. But man, we maybe did 2 or 3 gigs before they kind of split up and went their own separate ways, and it was too hard to get around, too hard to move my gear, and I just never hooked up with people who wanted to do any major gigging. And I don't know that I had a ton of extra time for it, because I was trying to compress 4 years of college into my last 3 years at Berkeley. So I was working pretty hard, right. And they have you got to do a lot of studio time and book that and stay on top of that. And it's hard getting around. It's expensive having a car and parking a car. It's just, it just never really happened for me club wise in Berkeley. So I just kind of finished school and then moved to Nashville, and then I became a studio rat in the beginning until I started doing live gigs, and that's kind of when it started to take off.
The big question is, did you become a Red Sox fan?
I did, and still am.
Oh,
and they got a big they got some ground to catch up before they can hopefully make it to the series this year, but they're hanging in there longer than I thought they would.
Right, and of course, this airs in a couple of weeks, so we'll know the outcome by the time this airs.
Yeah.
Let me switch over to you, Chad. Now, first of all, Scott, you play keyboards and sing with Carrie. I just should have said this earlier. Chad, you play all sorts of stringed instruments, dobro, guitar, and tenor saxophone.
That's right.
We're going to get to that, because that's my big question mark for you. But you grew up right outside of Nashville. You grew up in Tennessee, is that right?
I did, actually. I grew up in East Tennessee, so it's about 4.5 to 5 hours from Nashville.
Oh, so not that close.
Right, it's at the very point of where Tennessee and Virginia meet. And also, very much like Scott, we're on very parallel paths. I grew up in the Tri-Cities, different Tri-Cities, but it was Kingsport, Johnson City, and Bristol. I grew up in Kingsport, but my dad was also a musician, and he was a singer-songwriter and entertainer. So he would do a lot of conferences and banquets and different things like that around the area, in the East Tennessee area. And then my mom was a piano player for church. So she's more of reading the music. My dad was more of by ear. My mom was more, by the music. So, and we, growing up, we had a little family band. My brother played bass, and then we had a neighborhood kid that played drums. Cool fact, all 3 of us are professional musicians. My brother plays bass for Joe Nichols, country artist. And then the drummer, Matt Mahaffey, he does all kinds of things. He's produced Pink. He did some things on the Shrek album. His latest claim to fame is doing all the music for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for Nickelodeon. And then also what a lot of people know him by is Expedia.com. That's him.
I wish I would have wrote that one.
And so, yeah.
Can you imagine the checks going to the mailbox for that one? Can you say direct deposit?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, can you say direct deposit?
Oh, I know. Unbelievable. But anyway, so once my dad and mom as well, but once they saw that we were musically inclined and we really liked it, they very much were nurturing to that. And so we were in chorus, we were in band where I played saxophone and then also a snare drum during marching season. And, and we would play as a band, we would play Dollywood, Opryland, Tweetsie Railroad, like a little amusement park, any kind of city function, anywhere where they'd have us, we'd play. And when it came time for college, my mom's thinking more practical terms. She's like, well, you guys got to go to school, got to go to college. Mm-hmm. Then my dad was saying, well, if you've got to go to school, go where the music is. So for us being more country driven, it's like, go to Nashville. So I went to Belmont University here in Nashville and got a degree in music business and then another one in marketing. And while I was at Belmont, very much like Scott, I was just playing as much as possible with anybody that would let me, perform with them or whatever the case may be. And being in Nashville, it's a very music town. So there's a lot of songwriters nights is what I did mostly, but then also some clubs and bars, which are more like music venues instead of like clubs. So a lot of people get the idea of a club of just people, getting hammered, but it's more of a music scene. So yeah.
I wonder what the difference is. Have you guys ever discussed your tenure at Belmont and Berkeley? I mean, they've got to be similar kind of educations. In I just wonder what the environment would be like, and how different that would be. Can you explain to me what the environment was like at Scott at Berkeley? What was that? Was it nurturing? Was it competitive?
Berkeley was interesting. I think you get out of it what you put into it. We saw a lot of people who would come in there their freshman year expecting to be transformed into rock stars, and then when they kind of would see the work it took, and they would kind of see what they were up against, because I guess a lot of folks come out of the small pond, into the big city, and then they're put in there with people who are in the upper percentile of musicians, and they kind of see what the competition is really in the world, not just in their small town. And so a lot of kids were like, peace out, I'm gonna go study IT or something like that. But some kids would stay and they dig in their heels, and the ones with the good work ethic would hit the practice rooms, and you just never see them. You just kind of walk by and you hear them shedding their rhythm changes and listening to the solos and transcribing and just working. And there was a lot of, it was the 80s. It was the late 80s, but still, I mean, Berkeley still had a really heavy jazz influence, although there was plenty of pop stuff going on. And I was there as a music production and engineering major, so I wasn't really concentrating on performance necessarily when I went there, but part of the curriculum was taking lessons, and so I took keyboard lessons, I took some voice lessons, and I was in some ensembles and performing as well. But the reason I chose Berkeley was because I wanted to learn about recording and producing. And at that time, David Foster was, kind of a hero of mine. He was somebody I really enjoyed the sound of his work and his arrangements and his musical sensibilities. And so I really kind of wanted to study that and how he achieved some of the sounds and in sonic environments that he did on those Chicago records, and all the soundtrack work that he did, and even some of his symphonic work. And so that's kind of that was pretty much the environment there at Berkeley. It wasn't so competitive. I mean, it was pretty supportive. People definitely had cliques of people that they went to, and it was tough breaking in to some of the circles, but I got involved in. There was a part of Berkeley called the Yo Team, and they put on a lot of the big shows, like the Singers. I think it's called the Singer Showcase, and the rhythm or rock, and I can't remember, but anyway, jazz rock ensemble. That's what it was, and so they kind of saw that I was pretty quick to pick up stuff and actually threw me in there as a background singer at first, and then found out that I could play keys, and so they would start utilizing me more and not give me a little more exposure to kind of start playing in different shows speckled around the school. But it wasn't as big a school as it is now either, and so you pretty much knew almost everybody that went there. And so I imagine, there wasn't a real big country presence at Berkeley.
Right.
I'm sure they do a little bit of jazz at Belmont, but maybe Chad can speak more to that. But that's kind of what Berkeley was like.
Yeah, Chad, why don't you explain what the environment was like over at Belmont when you were there?
Well, yeah, it was actually very similar to what Scott was saying with Berkeley in terms of, and the way I always looked at it was, college is kind of, you guys were talking about baseball. Here's your baseball reference. College is minor league, and then, of course, getting out of college and going professionals more than major leagues. But there was definitely competition there, and some of it was healthy, some of it was not so healthy. But, there was a lot of, I was actually also in studio production, so that was my emphasis. And so I was a studio rat in terms of engineering and then also playing on different people's tracks. And of course, thank goodness some of those are buried somewhere. Because
I just happened to find them. Let's listen to them right now.
But Belmont was definitely at that time, because this is back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, it was more country and Christian music, more CCM. And there was some rock coming out of there, but not as much, rock pop. But, it was interesting because every now and again you'd see, it seemed to be more females coming in like as being artists, where their dad is basically saying, you're going to be the next Trisha Yearwood, or you're going to be the next Reba McEntire. Just go to this school and it will happen for you. And, that was not the case. And, there was definitely a very quick filtering of people who've got it and who don't. And, sometimes it took a little longer for others, but yeah, definitely for that, it was a great step into, right before getting into the majors and being at Belmont.
So, Chad, let me stick with you. Right after college, you joined the Wilkinsons, right?
I did.
Tell me how does a guy fresh out of college get that gig?
Yeah. So while I was at Belmont, I was in a ton of different bands all the time, just, playing for whatever. And there was this one particular band that we were really going for a record deal, because this is, record deals were a big deal back then.
Yeah, they were.
And so then this is your traditional of getting a producer, that producer maybe taking you into different labels on what's called Music Row, that was here in Nashville, right, where a lot of the business took place, and studios and publishing houses and everything. And so Matt Rawlings and Kenny Greenberg were the guys producing us, and they were taking us into different labels, different publishing companies to get a buzz going about our little group. And unbeknownst to me, one of the publishing companies that we played in front of, there was a guy named Doug Johnson that was in the room. And Doug Johnson is a producer who actually produced the Wilkinsons. And as I got closer to graduation, I had nothing lined up for out of college. And of course, I'm thinking, man, did I screw up? My principal instrument was dobro. So I'm thinking, did I focus on the wrong instrument? And like, it's so, so boutique and everything. And about a month before I graduated, I get a call from one of the large artist management companies here in Nashville, Fitzgerald Hartley, and the manager for the Wilkinson said, hey, Doug Johnson is their producer. He heard you play, and they want you to be part of their group for Fanfare, which is now CMA Music Fest. And, of course, I said, well, do you want to hear me play? Do you want to hear anything? He said, no. If Doug says you're the guy, you're the guy. Wow. And so that was my first step into basically being in the majors. So I played the Fanfare with them. That would have been like in June. Then that fall, they got on the Alan Jackson tour. So that was my first real tour, was on Alan Jackson. So it was quite the ride of stepping into that. Keeping the faith, was a big part of that. But that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, but you were prepared and you were ready to go. When that opportunity knocks, you got to be ready to go.
That's right.
Scott, something similar happened to you, right? Right out getting out of college, you joined Allies. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Who's in that band and how that kind of helped your career?
So my goal after graduation was to move to Nashville and try and break into the Christian contemporary music business, which is kind of where it was all happening at the time, is Nashville. And I had a lot of friends that I graduated with who had already moved down and were doing some pretty heavy-duty engineering over at what was then Digital Recorders. There were a lot of Christian records being made over there, and they had a lot of connections, kind of kicked some doors open for me before I got here. And I waited tables for a while, and then I purchased some recording gear and started doing some demos and working with a local singer-songwriter. And I got an interview with a publishing company down on Music Row who was looking for... They didn't have any in-house studio, so they were kind of looking for an all-in-one guy who could... They didn't want to purchase gear. They would love to find somebody who had gear and could engineer and could cut their demos. So that I fit that bill, and I brought along... They didn't really need the production side of it, but I had a lot of keyboard gear, so I brought that in with me. And once I started engineering for them, they found out I could also produce and arrange. And, back then, just about every track demo that was coming out was programmed because nobody could afford live players. And so if you wanted it to sound somewhat pro, they sequenced it. And so I got real handy with my Roland MC 500 and started making tracks for them. And that kind of got the word around a little bit. I started working with some good singer-songwriters. And a friend of mine... Nashville, it's so much who you know and making connections and networking. A friend of mine that went to our church was doing some studio wiring for these guys that had just moved from California into Nashville because it was so much cheaper. And they were Christian artists and they were tired of doing everything from California. And they had just written this big hit for Dolly Parton called Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That? And so these two guys weren't country writers per se, but they were able to pitch that song to Dolly, and it was a pretty big hit. So that was kind of their ticket to move to Nashville and try their hand at writing country songs as well as keeping their Christian band together. This band was Allies, and the two guys that ran Allies were Randy Thomas, who was the guitar player, and he's in another band called Sweet Comfort Band with a singer named Brian Duncan and some other guys. But the lead singer of Allies was Bob Carlyle, who would later go on to record Butterfly Kisses.
Sure.
And kind of do a solo thing. He had a pretty huge smash hit with that. So they were kind of the owners of the band, and it was a 5-piece, but the other 3 guys were kind of just guns for hire. They were on the record, the pictures and everything, but Bob and Randy pretty much owned the band, and the other guys were in the band as long as they wanted to be in, but nobody else wanted to move to Nashville. So they left California and were looking for new hired guns in Nashville. And so this friend of mine who had wired Randy's studio said, "Hey, you ought to check out this young kid, Scott Sheriff. He's a good keyboard player if you look, and I know he can sing too." So Randy gave me a couple songs to learn. He came over to the studio and we played through them. And he's like, "Man, that sounds great. If you can start right now, we got some gigs lined up." And so that was they were a signed band. They had put out 4 or 5 records. They were, pretty big as far as Christian acts go. They weren't Butterfly Kisses big, but in the CCM world, everybody knew who Allies was because Bob Carlyle's voice is just unmistakable, and everybody was just nuts over it because he's such an amazing singer and a great. He's also a fantastic guitar player and songwriter. So. They were well known and critically acclaimed, and so that was kind of my foot in the door. I'm playing for an established band. They got a record deal, and they had just finished putting out a record, so we were touring that record called The River, and there were plans to cut their next record, which was Man with a Mission, and we were going to get to play on that record since it was going to be cut in Nashville, and we were now the new band. So the bass player at that time was Mark Hill. He's gone on to be one of the most in-demand session players in Nashville, and the drummer was Brian Fullen. So we were the 3 Nashville hired guns in Allies, and that kind of got my foot in the door. And I had another friend from college, from Berkeley, who was working with Stephen Curtis Chapman at the time, and he was a keyboard player, but he was also his road manager. His wife was in the band as well. She played keyboards, and they both sang, but he was looking to kind of stay home and start a family, and so he kind of let me know that he was on the outs, and Stephen would be looking for a keyboard player, and Stephen was really cresting with his career. I mean, he broke out of Belmont, and he just had guns a-blazing, and he was a great songwriter. He was winning Dove Award after Dove Award, and his record sales were just climbing. And so when Bob left, Bob Sauer left, he threw in a good word for me, and I called his management and said, "Hey, I play with Allies. I'd love to audition for Stephen if he's looking for a new keyboard player." And so one thing led to another. I did the audition and ended up with that gig, and was on that for a good while.
Whoa, man, what a journey that is. Now,
Yeah.
Chad, you were out with the Wilkinsons for a couple of years. You came home to work on your own band. Tell me a little bit about Pin Monkey.
Yeah, Pin Monkey.
Pin Monkey.
So I met the lead singer back when I was at Belmont, and he had already graduated, but I met him through a friend of a friend. And then he and I did a lot of these songwriters nights around Nashville while I was still at Belmont. That's what I was talking about earlier. And so then I went out and was performing with the Wilkinsons, and then we kept doing Pin Monkey. We kept, or actually it wasn't Pin Monkey at the time. It was just the two of us. Eventually we needed a bass player. We tried a bunch of different bass players, and I said, "Well, how about my brother?" And of course, the lead singer was like, "Why didn't you say that in the first place?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't want to be that guy. Hey, I got a brother, And so, so my brother joined, and then we had found a drummer, and we didn't want to pay him. So we just said, "Well, just become a member of the band, and we won't have to pay you." So it was a 4-piece.
Smart business.
Yeah, right. And so the drummer was actually out with Poco and Pure Prairie League and a couple of different artists. And so we, whenever he and I were both in town, the four of us would get together and be playing, because the other two guys just had day jobs. But we'd, record and do all kinds of stuff, play out as much as possible. And then sure enough, we get a call from RCA, and they wanted us to sign us. And so we were with RCA for a couple of years, and we that band in all, we did one independent album, then we did the RCA album, which is the big budget one, and then we did another independent one after that. And it was a great time. And it was toward the end of that is when I'd actually been doing a lot of writing during the Pin Monkey years, and one of the guys I wrote with was a guy named Wayne Kirkpatrick. And Wayne and I would get together at his studio. He and I would just, write a couple of songs and just do guitar vocals, and then I'd play dobro. And so it'd just be kind of a, more of a work tape, but still kind of a demo. But then he was also producing Little Big Town at the time. So then he would, things that we were writing, he would upgrade. So then he'd bring in Chris McHugh, Mark Childers, and then Little Big Town would sing on it for maybe something that Little Big Town would want, but maybe something Pin Monkey would want, or something we could just get cut somewhere else. Right. And it was through those work tapes, demos, whatever you want to call it, that Chris McHugh heard me. And so then he told Mark Hill, which Scott was just talking about Mark Hill, and told Keith about me, that Keith was looking for a slide player to go out. So Keith Urban, okay. Keith Urban, yeah. So anyway, so sure enough, Mark Hill calls me and says, "Hey, we're looking for a slide player, and your name has been brought up by Chris McHugh." So that's how I got onto the Keith Urban gig, was doing that.
Wow. Well, before we get much further past this point in time, I want to talk a little bit, Chad, about the fact that band you had, Pin Monkey, got dropped, right? Because everything isn't just great all the time. This business is peaks and valleys. And my question for you is, how do you keep your spirits up? What's your mindset after that? How do you just keep a positive attitude and keep rocking and rolling? Because that's hard, man. Your dream band gets dropped from a big label thing, and then it's like, now what?
Right.
Really?
Well, so after the big budget album that we did with RCA, we were working on another one with Mark Bright. And Mark Bright at the time was producing Rascal Flatts, and he had produced some Reba stuff and a bunch of other different people. And we were in the middle of making the second big budget album with Mark. And then that's when we got dropped. And so our manager called Mark and just said, "Hey, man, Pin Monkey, we got dropped." And, so we're kind of back to square one. The guys want to go ahead and just do an independent album. Are you in? And, Mark said, "Well, I fell in love with the band. I didn't fall in love with them because they're signed. So I'm on board. Let's do this." So we did a low budget album with Mark Bright. And so literally we would go and he would find studios like at the last minute that was not booked for the next day. And so then we'd go in that next day, track everything, and then bring it back here to my house. And then we would do overdubs and everything else. And so there would be a lot of days that Mark would be with Rascal Flatts guys and then come over here. Then we'd work until 1 or 2 in the morning on Pin Monkey stuff. And so that, it's always tough to be dropped, but we also had somewhat of a buyout. So we actually got some money for us to go away, which definitely makes it a lot easier. But I think with that coupled with us making another album with the same producer that we were making, the big budget album with, and Mark is just an amazing guy, really helped a lot. And so, yeah, it was great. And then, of course, Mark Bright comes back into my career scene a couple of years later whenever I get my gig with Carrie Underwood, who he also produces.
Wow. Scott, tell me.
All of this is I'm sorry. So all of this is interwoven. So whenever someone says, "How did you get this gig?" There's not like one thing I can say, "Well, I just did this and it worked." It's all the small things added up that compounds. And you never know where that next relationship or that next that next person that you meet, how that might change your whole career.
Right. So show up 100% all the time. Right?
Yeah. You've got to. Especially in these music towns like Minneapolis and Nashville and New York and LA, because there's a million people right behind you that can do the job.
And they want your gig.
Yeah.
Get him out of there. I'm getting in there. Very true. Scott, I was going to ask you about how you got the Billy Ray Cyrus gig.
It was just for a short time. It wasn't really. It wasn't for very long. Billy Ray put out a Christian record, and at the time I wasn't doing a whole lot. They were looking for someone to go out with him on a radio tour who could sing and play keyboards. And at the time, one of the guitar players I played with Stephen Curtis Chapman, had a brother who was the A&R person for Billy Ray over, I think, Word Records was where he ended up signing as a Christian artist. And so he was like, "Okay, well, I remember Scott from the Stephen Curtis days. Maybe he's not doing anything. I know he always used to sing backgrounds with Stephen." So he threw me on these couple of radio gigs. And, it was me and a guy named Chris Rodriguez, who's a guitar player, singer, played with Kenny Loggins for years. And Michael W. Smith is kind of where I first discovered Chris on the Big Picture live record, I think was what it was called. And so it's just, then was another A&R guy too, so it was two acoustic guitars and keys, and we all sang behind Billy Ray as he was out there, just shaking hands and meeting new folks in the Christian radio world. And Walmart and things like this. We were just kind of out promoting his record just in an acoustic setting. We would just do 5 or 6 songs, whatever. And, it was fun traveling with him and meeting. That's the first time I actually got to hang out with Chris and play with him. And we would kind of goof around at rehearsal, and we kind of had a lot of the same sensibilities. We were brought up on the same artists and stuff that we loved. And he's like, "You'd be a good sub for Loggins if that ever, came around." And so I think he ended up talking to Carl Hergesell, who was on the Loggins gig as keyboard player. It still is now.
Yeah.
But he was taking a break to to leave and do some other things, and he had to miss some dates. So he ended up calling me the fall of 2006. I happened to be I remember I was driving around. I was at the PGA Championship in Medina, Illinois. It was the year Tiger won, but I'm driving home after the golf one day, and Carl calls me and asks me if I can sub for Kenny Loggins in October. So he was well ahead of when he needed me to sub, but it was good because that stuff takes some work to get under your fingers. And they had some great advanced preparation tools. They made those ISOs with your parts and your vocal parts all panned off to one side, so it's easy to hear exactly what the guy you're replacing sounds like every night, so that when you get up there, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's like, okay, I just want to cover what this guy's doing, so
right.
I want it to be as seamless for the artist as possible. If I try and start to recreate everything, that takes some time to work in and get a rapport with the artist. I just want to come in and make it seem like the other guy's there, it's just somebody else, so that you can make yourself an invaluable sub that way if you just take that viewpoint. I don't want to rock the boat. There's plenty of time to show my stuff, what I can do, but what I need to do for this gig is just be that person. And subs like that, I think, are invaluable. Now that I've kind of been doing some band leading in Nashville, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And I try and set my subs up the same way by, I have charts for every song. I've got recordings of their vocal parts for them to learn. That was a great lesson I learned in Kenny's band. It was just such a obvious thing, but it makes so much sense to just record what the guy does every night,
right,
and make a tape of it for his sub so he can hear what's expected of him and what the artist is used to. Last thing you want to do is throw off a guy when he's in front of 5,000 or 6,000 people because you're showing off or trying to show how great you are, and it's not the scene for me anyway. But so that's kind of what led me to the Loggins gig. And then after Carl left to do some things with, I guess it was Kathy Tricoli. He was doing some duo stuff with them. Kenny asked me to come on full-time as his keyboard player. And then shortly after that, his MD was also leaving to pursue some German opera stuff.
Right.
And so with his exit, that's when, Paul, you came into the picture, and then Kenny asked me to be MD after that. And then the next... with that, what's the name of that? How About Now was the name of that record. It was a Nashville record and had some Gabe Dixon keys on it and some great slide on it and steel and stuff. And so they brought Chad into the picture for those when we started demoing that record and promoing that record, showcasing that kind of stuff. And that led to the summer tour with all three of us there.
Was that a Chris Rodriguez connection for you as well, Chad?
It was, yeah. So I get a phone call literally on a landline here at the house, and it's this guy, and I see it's a California number, and there's a good friend of mine who's also from California, and he and I play tricks on each other all the time when we don't answer the phone. So I see this call, and I'm thinking, this is my buddy Danny. That's Danny. So I answer the phone, and whenever I answer the phone, you could kind of hear someone kind of shuffling and like, oh yeah, wait, okay, wait, yeah, is Chad there? And like, yeah, this is Chad. He goes, hey, this is Kenny Loggins. And I'm like, Danny, what's going on? He goes, no, it's Kenny Loggins. And then, when he said it about the second or third time, I could hear the timbre in his voice. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Kenny Loggins.
It really is Kenny Loggins.
And so he just said, I did this Nashville album, as Scott was saying, and there's a lot of slide stuff on it. And, I was asking, my longtime friend and bandmate, Chris Rodriguez, and he says, you're the guy. So can you be in LA, in a couple of weeks, or I guess about a month or so, and know everything and be ready to go. And I said, sure, why not? And of course I said, hey, well, do you want me to send something of what I play and kind of what I sound like? And he goes, no, that's all right. Raj says you're the guy, so you're the guy.
I mean, I'm the only one who had to audition for that gig. I actually had to audition for that gig.
What's funny is that any gig I've ever gotten, I never auditioned for.
I hate auditioning. Auditioning
I do
is
too.
horrible.
I think
It's
that is a
horrible.
waste of time.
It's so bad. Line up 1,000 guys and just see what happens. That was crazy.
But I got to tell you, man, that when we first started doing rehearsals there, I think it might have been Burbank or somewhere. I just remember, man, it was a pressure cooker for me because, you guys were all kind of set up in a U shape. And of course, for those listening, Kenny has normally like a bullpen of players. So, he might have 2 or 3 drummers, a couple of guitar players because, he mix and matches, when people are busy out with other artists. And so he had you guys all in a horseshoe. Then I'm right in the middle with him looking right at me. And I was I heard from a lot of you guys that his ears are amazing. He hears everything musically. And I was just sweating bullets when we started doing those songs because I knew that he knew every part that I was going to play. And so kind of like what Scott was saying, I learned those parts note for note, and I'm not trying to rock the boat, and I'm not trying to show him my coolest little flashy lick that I just learned on guitar. My job is to be of service to the artist and to know the music that they sent me and just rock it from there. And I'll never forget that day. That morning I needed to go, change a shirt or something because I was sweating.
Well, he would sweat you. He would know exactly what he wanted to hear, and he would correct you.
Precisely. Which,
That's the kind of
Scott
artist
was
he
talking
is.
about. Yeah, and Scott was talking about, learning by ear, and that's how I learned. And, so that's, and of course, I was the new guy in the band. And the new guy with the new toys, the slide instruments and everything. So, during sound check, he'd come over to me and say, "Hey, can you play this?" And da 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 da. He'd sing it to me. Then I would just try to play back what he just sang. And I just remember some of those sound checks that we did. And, we do all these different versions of "I'm All Right." And so when showtime comes around, I'm thinking, what version are we doing? There's a lot of bright eyes looking at each other on stage. So that was a lot of fun.
Boy, I'll never forget that time with you guys. I mean, that bonded us forever. That tour, we'll be friends for all times because of that.
Yeah.
Pretty darn cool. Just because I want to be good to you guys, I want to jump ahead. We did the Loggins thing. That kind of disappeared. Now, in between time, Chad, did you have another gig that you went to right away out of Kenny? Did you go right to Carrie?
I did, yeah.
But you did not, right, Scott? You had a little time off in between there, right?
Yes, I had some time off, and
well, I want to ask you about that time off because time off sometimes is scary.
Yeah. And,
did you think did you think it would be rocking and rolling and getting on another major tour, or did it ever cross your mind that you wouldn't?
It definitely did cross my mind that that I was content with doing the local thing because I had started developing these cover bands in Nashville. We started with I joined Kenny's band in 2007, but even 3 years before that, we had started a Steely Dan tribute here in Nashville, and that was going really well. And we were, just about selling out the Third and Lindsley Club just about every time we played, and we started to mix in some Chicago, and we formed a Chicago tribute as well. And so I was starting to get I kind of was like, if nobody else wants me to work for them, I'm gonna start creating things of my own and maybe kind of be my own boss and try and develop some niche things here in town that no one else was doing. And so that that was working out okay, and just kind of had a lot of different irons in the fire. I do a lot of Sibelius music notation work and still do. At the time, when I started getting involved with Kenny, and he started working with David Foster. David Foster's music director came to me to see if I had any of charts of Kenny's music that they could build off of for their shows when Kenny would come in and sing. And I showed him my work, and he liked my work, and you want to come work for us when we do shows. So he would start farming the David Foster band work, part of the notation work, out to me, and it was kind of a bullpen. So to speak. There was 3 or 4 of us, I think, that were working on all those shows because there were just so many songs. It would be pretty overwhelming to ship all that to one person. But the music director liked what we did, and so he would continue to, and I'd end up doing all these songs I loved, like Earth, Wind and Fire and Celine Dion, and then Bocelli would come in, and he would do I'd be doing all this incredible music, and I even did a couple Carrie songs once I started playing with her because he came to me for the same thing. She did a fight night for him down in Phoenix. But anyway, so I had that time in between, and I'd even thought maybe about going back to school and learning to be a web designer because things weren't happening really after the Kenny thing shut down. And but eventually, they started to pick up, and then I got the call out of the blue from Carrie's music director, who had known me from the CCM days. We had kind of worked our way up through the ranks, playing with different artists, never playing with each other, but we had enough people that we cross-pollinated with that we knew of each other and were familiar enough. We had one common friend. He's a guitar player here in town, and he's not here in town anymore, but his name was David Cleveland. He moved to Virginia, but still does a ton of work here. But he was huge in the session world. But he came up in a band that Mark came up in called Truth, and then David went on to play with Stephen Curtis Chapman. So we would do some Super Bowl parties, yada yada, and I got to know Mark and his brother Mike Childers. And so when Carrie's keyboard player decided to kind of stay home and do some other things, he knew that I could sing and play, and so they wanted to have a keyboard player that could do both. And so he gave me a call and asked if I wanted to come and audition. And so I went and sang for them. He said, I don't need to see you play, but I would love to hear you sing. And the management folks kind of want to hear how your voice blends with Carrie and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of how I got my shot and got in the Carrie camp.
So that wasn't a call from Chad. That wasn't Chad going, I know the guy over here.
No.
But I bet you were going, yes, please, come on.
No, but when I heard it, I thought, this is awesome. This is so great. So,
how many years have you guys been playing with Carrie? You've been with her a little bit longer, right, Chad?
I think around 14 years.
Is that right?
Is that right? Yeah. So, right after the Kenny, so.
Golly. What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I've only been 6 years since 2015. 6.5.
What's the best thing about the Carrie gig? I'll start with you, Scott.
The best thing for me is their management from the top down has really chosen well when they make their hires. It seems like everybody in her organization is really at the top of their game with what they do, from the tour manager, merchandise, the monitor people, the tech people. Just I'm able to show up at a festival without a sound check and put in my ear monitors, and it's exactly how I want it. And he just knows. They hire people who have sensibilities and just know what they're doing, and they're always at the top of their game, and it just makes our life so much easier to just be able to, show up and do what we do and not have to worry about doing something else,
What about you, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the professionalism is a big part for me because, you know exactly what your role is, and there's no guessing. I've been in certain situations where, some people are buddy with the artist, and you're trying to figure out what do I need to do? Do I need to hang out with the artist or do my actual what they're hiring me to do? And with Carrie, it's like, exactly what your role is, and I think when you have that space and those boundaries, with that space, you can go to the edge of the boundaries, and you can really be yourself and do your job at a high level. It goes without saying, I mean, it's awesome to have Carrie's vocals in my ears on a nightly basis, and just to hear a world-class singer, and along with a world-class band. I mean, just to have everyone, like Scott was saying, everyone's at the top of their game, and to have all of that with that magic happening. And it is amazing that we can go to these fairs and festivals and just literally walk on stage, put our ears in, and go and perform, and everything is just like it should be. It really is amazing.
and you're playing tenor saxophone. I about fell out of my chair when I saw that.
So
Tell
the
me
story
about
with
that. Yeah,
All
I
right,
want to
so
hear
the
it.
story with that is I played in high school. I played saxophone in the concert season, but I marched snare in marching season. So anyway, and I was going for scholarships right out of high school. And I actually got a couple of full rides, but then I decided I wanted to go to Belmont because of the music business program that they had. So, so pretty much I shelved the saxophone. Literally, just it's like it's still in my studio here, the one that I had, and has not been out of the case. And then whenever we started the Cry Pretty tour, starting production rehearsals and, of course, management and the music director getting different ideas together, our music director sent out a text saying, "Hey, I know this is a long shot, but does anybody in the band play saxophone?" And of course, I'm thinking, okay, do I raise my hand or do I just kind of,
Right.
like, nah. And my good buddy Scott Sheriff, not to mention any names, said, "Hey, I think Chad played once." So,
Did you call him
I
out?
don't remember that. I
Threw
don't
him
know.
under the
I
bus.
guess maybe I did. Oh gosh.
Because
Oh,
when I
that's
saw that, I'm
classic.
like, "Ugh, okay, yeah." And I told our music director, I said, "Well, I sort of play." And he said, "Well, how can you sort of?" I'm like, "Well, I haven't played in 20 years or 25 years. And I was able to go. One thing great about Nashville is there's a lot of music manufacturers here that make instruments and everything. I found someone that made saxophones, and they hooked me up. And it was kind of like riding a bicycle that came back. Some nights better than others, but it's putting it all out there. And once again, I'm just trying to be of service to the artists that I work for, and it's fun.
Congratulations to both you guys on what a great gig and great careers that you guys have. It's just, for me, sitting back, and because I know you guys, to be able to see my brothers on all the award shows, all the late night talk shows, and I'm like, there he is. Julie and I are sitting here going, yeah. So we're so happy for you and proud of you and all that. It's just fantastic to watch. I do have a question for you, Chad. Now, you also have another side of things. When you're not on the road, tell folks what you're doing when you're not on tour.
So I do luxury real estate here in the Nashville area, and I work for a company called Compass, and they have a sports and entertainment division. So we primarily work with artists, musicians, managers, songwriters, and also sports figures as well. And a lot of people, they're like, I don't get it. Real estate, music. And so growing up, as I said earlier, my dad was a singer-songwriter and my mom was a realtor. So both of those careers have been in my blood from the get-go. And, it just a couple of years ago, I figured, hey, it's time to get into the real estate game because the market here in Nashville is amazing. And so
Good timing, brother.
Hey, why not just jump in? And it's great because it kind of scratches the itch of kind of how I feel on stage a lot of times, just that dopamine rush of entertaining people or being of service. And I'm loving it. It's really fun.
And you're a new papa.
And I'm a new papa. Yeah.
Congratulations, brother.
Thank you. Little Carter Ryman was was born on August 3rd. And he's just a little bundle of joy to us.
Good for you guys. Congratulations.
Not getting a lot of sleep, but we're good.
Scott, when you're not on the road, you're still doing your Steely Dan stuff and all your gigs, right? And your production stuff.
Yeah, we're still keeping the bands going. I'm in an Eagles tribute band called the Eagle Maniacs. That's not one of my bands per se, but they're really going like gangbusters. That band has an incredible following, and so it's not hard to rub two sticks together and find an Eagles fan. They're everywhere, and so they like what we do, and we get quite a few bookings with that band. And we have one band that's in transition. It was called Live from Ventura Boulevard, and we kind of put on the ¡70s clothes and we perform with the same guys and we call it Yachts Landing. And so we're trying to get in on the whole yacht rock movement that that those videos have spurred on, and there's a huge band in Atlanta that's just really running gangbusters, doing that stuff. And so they've been kind enough to let us in on their little niche market and help us out. So we hopefully can get that thing up and rolling when I'm not on the road. But yeah, so that's kind of what's happening down here in cover band world.
Well, you guys are about to get busy and do your residency with Carrie in Las Vegas. Before I let you go, because there are up-and-coming musicians and people who are interested in the music business who listen to this, and fitness people, tell me and give me a word of advice for people who are coming up in the music business. Something that has stayed with you and you feel is part of your success. Chad, I'll start with you.
I would say find out what makes you what makes your heart sing without trying to be too poetic. But I mean, I whether it's your instrument or whether it's voice or whether it's a style of music, find what just really makes you go. And because there's going to be a lot of hard days, and there's going to be a lot of long days, long nights, and it really helps whenever you really, when you're digging what you're either playing or the kind of music that you're playing. And then second, right behind that would be the people around you and the relationships that you make.
How about you, Scott?
For me, I think it goes back to just no matter what the gig, always show up like you're getting paid $1 million to do what you do. Whether it's a free gig or it might happen to be a good paying gig, always bring that same level of professionalism there, and it's all in the preparation, and I try and when younger musicians say, well, what should I concentrate on to make it in the business? I say, try and be as well-rounded as you can be. Learn, if you don't read, learn to read, but also develop your ear, because if you can be a double threat, there's a few more doors that can open up for you, and you get to do some of the extra things like, when we might implement a choir or something, I can put together, I can put a choir arrangement together for these folks. Oh, that brings added value to what you bring to a situation. We need a string arrangement. Well, I can do that too. I've done some string arranging, and, just add as many arrows to your quiver as you can, and always be prepared for any situation.
Brothers, I love you both so much, and it's so great to connect. Thank you for taking the time out to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate it. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great. It's been a pleasure.
All right, that's it for episode 50 of Music. 50 of Music on the Run. 50
awesome.
with two of my favorite people on the planet. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody. Music on the Run was hosted by yours truly, St. Paul Peterson. Edited and produced by my buddy Davide Raso. Video editing by Tanner Montague. And a very special thanks to the people who financially support this podcast. And remember, your network of people is everything.